All right, good afternoon, morning, or evening, or whatever it is for you. I am Brent, an author, amateur world builder, writing educator. You can find me as werewolf_doctor on Threads, Instagram, Patreon, Ko-Fi, and YouTube, as well as here, obviously. Fortunately, this week's stream has been a little bit behind as far as time, a couple hours later, due to some feline medical issues that are still being worked out, and the whole problem is now wandering off and perfectly happy, of course. So today, I think, or this week, or just looking, actually I'm going to look ahead a little bit. This week, I've got some plans to talk about some things that have kind of been in my head lately about where we start world building, use of questions, partially because of my day job, which is as a writing educator and writing tutor. So we get a lot of asking questions to draw out things draw out responses from students who come in for brainstorming and these purposes. Next week is going to be, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but it's the day before my birthday, so we'll see what we come up with as far as something potentially special or not. Or I may just treat it as any other week just for the heck of it. So anyway, generally or often a big question that comes up with world building is going to be, where do we start? And everybody has different preferences. Some like top down, some like bottom up. Some like big picture first. Some start off with small first and build out of there. Goes back to a bit of a chat that was going on Threads the other day from Ham the DM or Ham the DM. I'm not sure what she prefers. I've never heard it pronounced. Where it was asking about the vibe of a world versus a vibe of given regions and such, and if worlds had vibes and that sort of thing. So that's definitely a big picture starting place, whether we're dealing with a really dark and problematic world, like say the Warhammer 40k universe, or a more survival type world, as in the case of many of the eras of Dragonlance's Kryn, or something that's more mundane or more kind of almost borderline cozy. What pops in my head immediately is Delicious in Dungeon, because I started watching that recently. So even though it doesn't quite fit in there. Some start off at that level. Personally, I tend to start on a smaller scale. Obviously, we can start anywhere. And in the small scale, we can also start anywhere. Sometimes I've had world builds that start off with a particular place that got in my head and wouldn't leave, so I started working with that. Some cases it might be a city or an idea for a city that comes to mind. Sometimes a nation, sometimes a particular lineage or race or species, if you prefer. I try to find a home for it. Sometimes a magic system. That one's a fairly common one for me, actually, is to have a magic system come to mind and then figure out a place to put it together and kind of how to set it up. Sometimes a group comes to mind, an organization of some sort. Sometimes it's an item or an object, and I try to build something around that. Sometimes it might be a deity, a god, goddess, that sort of thing, or a group of them, or a concept of divine cosmology that might come to mind. One that I recall specifically I've worked with a long time ago, had a concept of generations of deities. So there was a sort of primordial deities who were involved in creating the world. There was then a elder generation that was mostly focused around the concerns of early societies, agriculture, basically survival type stuff. Agriculture, understanding things like nature and those sorts of areas. And there was a younger generation that was more of the, or kind of a middle generation rather, that was more of the less tangible parts of society, or potentially tangible parts of society that were more technology related, like writing or trade or crafts, trades, that sort of thing. And then the most recent generation was the completely intangible things. So it was the deities of things like emotional states or states of being, whether that be things like love or beauty or vengeance or things along those lines. And the idea there's a fifth generation in there as well that I think was, it's been a while since I looked at that one. I believe the fifth gen was foreign, which would be deities that were brought in or that came in from other worlds, because it was a multiverse setup, because I like multiverses for whatever reason. So in that setup, there was also the fifth category of deities who came from other places. That was kind of a huge build off of that. But then the rest of the build was figuring out what kind of world do these entities, these deities, preside over. What did they create? What do they live over? Another one could just be a character or group of characters, which has happened. I've actually had that happen myself a number of times where I've had an idea for a 3, 4, 5 characters, relationships between them, and then figure out what kind of world could that group exist in. So any of these are good starting points. There are a lot of different possibilities, a lot of different directions you can go with that. Just a second. So a lot of different ways we can go with that, a lot of different places we could go in terms of directions and things. A lot of different routes that can come into play based on where things are going. Just a second. But where we go with that, where we start with that, depends on what questions we ask and how we build out of things. In this case, or this route, when we start off with these smaller things, like places or cities or magic systems or organizations, we start trying to build the world that fits this thing, or that this thing could have been created by, or that it could exist and or thrive in. So in that case, the key question we want to look at is, what does this character, what does this place, what does this magic system, what does this lineage, what does this group need to exist? What does it need to have in the world that allows it to come into being, to operate, to be there? That can go a lot of different directions. Sometimes, if we're talking about like a race or a lineage, we may be looking at the geographic setup of the world, in terms of what kind of climates, what kind of territories, spaces are we working with. If, for example, we were going to work with, say, I'm just going to take a classic Forgotten Realms, etc., D&D race. If we were going to say we wanted to work with the create a species of dark elves who lived underground and were modified by strange magics that went on beneath, far, far deep under the underground, the drow, then there are certain geographic features that need to exist for that to come about. First and foremost, we need something that came to be known as the Underdark. Then we need to figure out, okay, how are they going to survive down there? What kind of allows this species to survive in this extremely far, deep underground, weird magic sort of situation. So we need to have, plants, animals they can farm or otherwise hunt or otherwise gather. And they have to have certain adaptations, of course, because of this particular environment, whether that be dark vision, infravision, depending on which edition we're dealing with. They start gaining powers because of their evolving in sort of a high magic area. So we get all these different other elements coming into play and factors coming into it. The same thing goes on if we have a city or a nation. Characters, we may have more of a need of social elements in a particular world. Same with groups, organizations. Objects, particularly magic-related objects, we're going to need a particular type of magic that's in play. We might need particular cultural styles, particular elements, particular tools that might need to be in place as well. Deities, on the other hand, are more of a top-down approach. They create what they need within a certain strictures, because we can get into the nature of divinity, which is a good question to think about when we're dealing with deities, and we might get to that a bit later. So right now, I think I want to focus on a couple different options. So the big ones I'm going to look at real quick, not necessarily real quick. I'll throw in deities as a possibility. And we may throw in a I got group, I got magic, I got place. I think we'll just go with those for now and see where that takes us. So when we're looking at a place and we have this idea for a particular site, this can be any kind of place in existence. So I think I'm just going to kind of randomize one because I have a nice little handy dandy. Where did I put that? There we go. I have a handy dandy little place generator that I put together. Where did that go? Let's see, organization, place tables. There we go, cool. So my handy dandy little place tables generator, which is available on my Ko-Fi and Patreon pages, as well as the free stuff site part of the website, has a bunch of different elements to it. I don't really care about activity status, secrecy, or openness at the moment. I care about what kind of place it is. I put together a number of different types of places: academic, business, restaurant type eatery, entertainment, government, inn, military, prison, religious, repository, residence, social, storage, tomb. And some things kind of combine both. An eatery, well, like a tavern, a bar, coffee shop, could be an eatery and social simultaneously. It depends on what we want to focus in on. So I think I'm just going to do something randomly there. Excuse me. 75. That is social. Okay, so we got a social place. A place is predominantly there for people to socialize in. We'll take it nice and easy, and we'll go with I'm going to give it a quick little. Actually, I'm going to give it a quick little roll. 1 to 2 coffee, 3, 4 tea, 5, 6 bar. Okay, tea shop. So we have a little tea shop, or a big tea shop, depending on what we want in there. So right off the bat, a few things immediately come to mind that we're going to need are going to be, obviously, the geographic and other conditions that allow for various teas to come into play. So, the issue that comes up there is that teas can come in various sorts from various places for obvious reasons, because there are different kinds of teas all over the place, and teas are almost kind of a universal concept in that a lot of different plants can basically be dried out, steeped in water, and produce essentially leaf juice, to put it that way. So I'm going to put a little note here for myself. Okay, so first we need a region or place we can get a decent amount of teas or tea leaves from. These could be from the tea plant, which is a specific kind of plant. Camellia sinensis, which is a basic tea plant. It's the one we have in various parts of the world. We get green tea and all that sort of stuff from. We can also make tea out of various other things. Technically we can make dandelion tea. We can make, you don't want to do, there are certain leaves obviously you don't want to touch. You don't want to obviously do poison ivy tea. That would not be good for anybody. But we can make a lot of teas out of a lot of different plants. So we got to figure out what kinds we have. Are we having teas from tea plant? Or are we having kind of more generic dandelion teas or, hibiscus teas, rose tea, whatever it happens to be, that are purely a particular type of non-tea plant. Once we figured that stuff out, when we deal with a place, we want to figure out a few other things. We want to ask a lot of questions. So key question is, what do we need in order for this to exist? On a physical level, certainly for a tea shop, we need tea. Culturally speaking, we need an interest in tea. And access to it. So whatever culture we're dealing with that this place is going to be located in needs to not only be interested in tea and perhaps make a culture or subculture around tea, but also to have access to it in the first place. If there's no access, it doesn't exist. Once we have those conditions, we can think about things like, why does this place exist? What is its purpose? What is its, this can have multiple different perspectives. On one hand, we have the owner-proprietor's purpose. Their purpose is clearly to make money, make a living doing something. That might be something that because they enjoy it, but it's still something that they are doing for the purposes of having a business and making a living at its core. There may also be other reasons. They may also be doing it to bring together a community in a particular area. They may be doing it to encourage local artists, whether those be musicians or poets or whatever entertainers there might be. They may also be doing it to create a sort of forum where people can discuss the hot topics of the day, or news, or politics, or scholarship, and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of different reasons we could have that. And there could be primary, secondary, and even tertiary whys as to why this exists. So each individual place may have multiple reasons, and those reasons might potentially change over time. Just because the tea shop was opened predominantly to blend and serve teas when it was created 5 years ago does not mean that it can't also eventually evolve a secondary purpose, a secondary why, in terms of showcasing local musicians and local artists. So those people can kind of come in and be a secondary reason that comes up over time. And hello to the two people who kind of came into viewing here. I'm right now kind of talking about some of the important sort of asking questions as we're doing world building for fantasy, urban fantasy, TTRPGs, writing, whatever it happens to be. And one of you left because of that. Okay, cool. You didn't want to be here for that. Awesome. I'm kind of focusing on some specifics right now, like a particular place, using a random generator I put together myself. It's on my website and elsewhere. I pulled up a tea shop. So we've kind of gotten through the what do we need and the why is this place existing. Other ones that come into play could be where are we locating this, and everybody fled. Okay, where do we locate this? Is it in a city? Is it in a town? Is it in a village? That's going to become important because we're going to be taking this one little place and building out from it. We can also add in how does it work? How does it exist? Is there and more importantly, or tied in with that, who created it? Who is the owner? Who is the proprietor? Who is the founder? Who takes care of it now? These aren't necessarily the same people, but they will guide the why and they'll guide some of the how. These are all interrelated questions. It's all the journalism questions coming into play. So who's in charge of it? Who founded it? Why does it exist? How does the person run it? How do they set up? How do they structure things? Who do they allow in? All of that sort of stuff comes into play. The how can get into how does the place exist. It can also be how does it work. It can be how many people are there involved, are there as staff, as residents or staff. In this case, is a tea shop. How many people are there? Regulars who are there all the time. This one's a great one to look at and think about. An example, particularly with a coffee shop that comes to mind, is, I'm blanking on the name of it. What was her name? What was the name of the place? There is yes, that's it. Maybe? No. There we go. Cool. Yes, the Cafe Cubana in the series Border Town or Borderlands, which was a series of anthologies put together, edited by Terry Windling back in the 80s, I want to say. Kind of based loosely on some parts of New York, like basically a fantasy New York with 80s punk vibes and all that sort of stuff going on. But Cafe Cubana was a coffee house tea shop that was set up in such a way that it brought in outside individuals. It was run by Screaming Lord Neville, who is definitely non-binary. May have been possibly drag queen, non-binary, mix of, but anyway, a bunch of different things went on there. So with that, it becomes there are regulars. That's where I was going with the who is regularly there. Are there regulars there? So in that particular case, there were regulars because it became a place for authors, for people who are working with this setting, to locate big name characters from the series who might be there and who might just be kind of sitting in the background, and it might be there at a particular time every day, sitting in the background for other characters to kind of pass by. And that adds some depth to the world and the presentation of the world, if there are things like people like regulars there. So where do we go from this? Well, we've got the place. We know why it exists. We know who's in charge of it, who's working with it, how they set things up. We also know kind of what we need. Because if we have this place, this tea shop, it does not exist in a vacuum. It has a location. It's at a place. It could be in a big city. It could be in a town. It could be in a village. And all of those are going to have different layers of building to it as we kind of build out from this place. And this is kind of one of my favorite ways to build, is to take a small single location that I'm interested in and then kind of build out what's around it and what's around that and what's around that and what's around that. Ultimately getting into either the nation level or the continent level. Arguably I go beyond that and I'll start building the multiverse level, even though I tend to skip the go from continent straight to multiverse rather than continent to world to multiverse. But we have this tea shop, then we say, where is it located? Okay, it's located on in the center of a village along the main street, or the main road, which is the only road there is, which is in the village, which is the King's Road. And it's across from the village green. Okay, now we've expanded a little bit beyond just that single place. Now, this is on the King's Road, so is there still a king? Is there no longer a king? What king was the King's Road referring to? In order to have a king, we have to have a nation of some sort, whether it be a city-state or a full-blown country. And regardless of that, we then figure out, is there still a sitting king? Is this a king? Was this road named, 500 years ago, and the kings were deposed, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? Is there still a reigning king? Maybe the whole country dissolved, and this village is now off on its own, completely independent, but used to be part of a kingdom. That builds us some history and creates some bigger history. We're kind of getting that bigger from that. We've gone then from this single place to a village to a nation or ex-nation, and we started building some history into that. And then we started asking things like, so if this nation, this king no longer exists, how did they get deposed? How did the nation they were with collapse? Did it get absorbed by somebody else? Did it fall apart? Were there things like civil war or foreign invasion or plague or natural disasters that led to it, or some combination of all of these that led to it collapsing in various ways? So as we work with that place, we kind of build out of there, and we keep building more and more out of there, because the tea shop can't exist by itself. It needs something else around it. So that we get the village, and the village doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has something else around it. So we get this, we get the region or the state that's around it, if there is one, and then that kind of doesn't exist on its own. So we have a continent or other nations, other political entities that are around it that eventually create something bigger, and just kind of goes from there and gets kind of progressively larger, kind of like nesting dolls, but in reverse. If you're putting the nesting dolls back together after taking them apart. A similar process happens if we're looking at an organization or a group. Say we have an idea to... Let's see. I'm going to do a random organization here. We have an idea to put together... Oh, that's a 20 for that one. Give me this. To put together a military organization. Okay, it could be military, it could be paramilitary. Let's actually do a quick, so a 1 to 2, it's an official military. 3 to 4, it's a semi-official paramilitary. Well, no, we'll do this differently. 1 to 3 official military, 4 to 6 paramilitary. Okay, it's official military of a government. So I'm going to say it's going to be let's give it a 50-50 for there. Okay. So this is going to be sort of a special non-mainline military unit. It's going to be basically the fantasy equivalent of a special forces group, for all intents and purposes. They're kind of the auxiliaries. They're not necessarily the levies who are untrained. They're not necessarily the kind of cannon fodder that we've just kind of brought out here, gotten from the fields. They're not the say core heavily armored, heavy infantry / knights type. They're going to be more of a group that goes in the fantasy equivalent of a group of the I don't know, we'll say the fantasy equivalent of the Army Rangers. Why not? Their job is to basically go in and soften targets, make basically places that the main army might be attacking easier to attack, do things like sabotage, opposing fortifications, or sabotage or raid or whatever, supply depots, that sort of thing. We could refine them as sort of a organized, attached to